The sterile silence of the courtroom was a pressure cooker, every tick of the clock amplifying the tension. On one side sat a betrayed, heavily pregnant wife, her face a mask of weary resolve. On the other, the polished, confident mistress, her hand resting possessively on the shoulder of a man who was both a husband and a coveted prize. The judge, a man whose face was etched with the grim lines of countless domestic wars, was about to deliver a verdict that would shatter one of their lives irrevocably. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing the finality to come. He was ready to grant the mistress everything she wanted until the courtroom doors swung open and a gasp rippled through the gallery. The secret witness had arrived. The life Jolie had built with her husband, Michael Sterling, was a meticulously curated masterpiece. From the outside, it was a fortress of envy. Their sprawling Georgian-style home in the heart of Bel Air was featured in Architectural Digest. Their charity galas were the talk of Los Angeles high society, raising millions for causes that looked good on paper. Michael, with his chiseled jawline and a smile that could disarm world leaders, was the charismatic CEO of Sterling Innovations, a tech behemoth he'd inherited and expanded. Jolie, with her quiet elegance and a master's in art history from Columbia, was the perfect complement, the graceful, supportive wife who managed their impeccable home, their social calendar, and until recently, her own burgeoning art consultancy. Their love story, once a whirlwind romance that had culminated in a lavish wedding at a Tuscan villa, had over the course of 7 years settled into a comfortable, if somewhat predictable rhythm. They were a power couple, a brand, the Sterlings of Bel Air. But beneath the gilded surface, cracks had begun to appear, fine as a spider's web at first, then branching out into fissures that threatened the entire foundation. It started with the late nights Michael excused as investor meetings, the hushed phone calls he'd take in his study with the door firmly closed. It was the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume clinging to his suits, a floral note too cloying to be hers. Jolie, ever the pragmatist, had tried to ignore it. Men like Michael, men with immense power and influence, had temptations. She had believed, or perhaps forced herself to believe, that their marriage, their partnership, was stronger than any fleeting indiscretion. Then came the business trips that grew more frequent, the emotional distance that became a chasm. He was physically present, but emotionally absent, his eyes glazing over when she spoke of her day or the baby growing inside her. This baby, their first child, was meant to be their anchor, the joyful culmination of their life together. Instead, it felt as if the impending arrival was pushing Michael further away. The truth, when it finally detonated, was far more brutal than a simple affair. It arrived not in a tearful confession or a private investigator's report, but in the cold, formal language of a legal summons. Michael wasn't just having an affair. He had built a second life. And the architect of that life, the woman who now sought to dismantle Jolie's own, was named Rosalind Rossi. Rosalind was everything Jolie was not. She was a fiery, ambitious marketing executive at a rival tech firm. Where Jolie was classic elegance, Rosalind was bold, modern glamour. Her social media was a curated gallery of exotic travels, exclusive parties, and intimate snapshots with powerful people, including, to Jolie's horror, Michael. She hadn't just been sleeping with Jolie's husband. She had been living a parallel version of Jolie's life, attending industry events on his arm, vacationing in the same exclusive resorts the Sterlings frequented, and charming the same circle of acquaintances. The ultimate betrayal, however, was the lawsuit. Rosalind, with Michael's full backing, was suing for sole custody of a child. Not just any child, their child. A child Jolie never knew existed. A 5-year-old boy named Leo. The preliminary hearings had been a blur of legalese and veiled insults. Michael, stone-faced and flanked by a team of cutthroat lawyers from a top-tier Beverly Hills firm, claimed that Jolie's emotional instability and preoccupation with her pregnancy made her an unfit potential guardian for Leo should anything happen to him. It was a thinly veiled threat, a strategic move to preemptively paint her as the hysterical hormonal wife. Rosalind, for her part, played the role of the devoted mother to perfection. She spoke in soft, measured tones about Leo's needs, his routine, his favorite foods. She presented photos of a sun-drenched life with Michael and Leo at the beach at Disneyland at a father-son charity race. They looked like the perfect family, a family Jolie had no part in. The courtroom today felt like the final act of a gruesome play. It was a custody hearing, but the implications were far broader. Granting Rosalind full legal and physical custody, as her petition demanded, and naming Michael as the primary financial provider, was a public declaration. It would legitimize their relationship, solidifying Rosalind's position as the true partner and mother figure in Michael's life. It would erase Jolie. Jolie sat at the defendant's table, her 8-month pregnant belly a prominent shield of her own impending motherhood. Her lawyer, a seasoned but weary public defender named David Chen, had warned her that the odds were stacked against them. The judge presiding over the case, the Honorable Judge Eleanor Thompson, was known for her no-nonsense approach and her tendency to favor the status quo, especially when a child's stability was in question. And the status quo, as Rosalind's lawyers had so effectively argued, was Leo with his mother Rosalind and his father Michael. Mrs. Sterling, Judge Thompson began, her voice a gravelly instrument of authority that cut through the thick silence. I have reviewed the extensive documentation provided by both parties. I've read the child psychologist's report, the financial statements, the character references. It is clear to this court that the child Leo has a stable and loving home with his mother, Ms. Rossi. Jolie's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the blood draining from her face. She looked at Michael, seated across the aisle. He wouldn't meet her gaze. His eyes were fixed on Rosalind, a look of grim determination on his face. He had chosen his other family. It is also clear, the judge continued, her eyes briefly flicking toward Jolie's swollen abdomen, that you are about to undergo a significant life change. While motherhood is a joyous occasion, it is also a demanding one. The introduction of a newborn into your life, combined with the emotional complexities of this situation, raises concerns about your capacity to take on a primary role in Leo's life at this time. Each word was a carefully aimed dart. The judge was using Jolie's pregnancy, Michael's child, against her. The injustice of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Rosalind, sensing victory, reached over and squeezed Michael's hand. A faint, triumphant smile played on her lips. She looked over at Jolie, her eyes glittering with a cold, hard satisfaction. It was the look of a predator who had successfully cornered her prey. Therefore, Judge Thompson said, picking up her gavel, it is the tentative ruling of this court to grant Ms. Rosalind Rossi full legal and physical custody of the minor child Leo Sterling Rossi. Mr. Michael Sterling will be granted liberal visitation rights and will be responsible for all financial support as outlined in. The world seemed to slow down. The judge's voice became a distant drone. Jolie could see the smug satisfaction on the faces of Michael's lawyers. She could see the tears welling in her own mother's eyes in the front row of the gallery. This was it. The final public humiliation. The complete and utter dismantling of her life. David Chen placed a calming hand on her arm, but she barely felt it. It was over. She had lost. But just as Judge Thompson raised the gavel to make her ruling final, a sound pierced the funereal atmosphere of the courtroom. Creak. Bang. All heads swiveled towards the back of the room. The heavy oak doors had been pushed open with force, swinging back on their hinges to slam against the marble walls. Framed in the doorway was a figure. A woman. She was unassuming at first glance, dressed in simple practical clothing, jeans, a worn leather jacket, and scuffed boots. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face, pale and drawn, was etched with an anxiety that seemed to vibrate off her in waves. She clutched a large, overstuffed tote bag to her chest like a shield. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Who was she? Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed in annoyance. This is a closed hearing. You are not permitted to enter. The woman ignored the bailiff, who was already moving towards her. Her eyes, wide and terrified, scanned the room, finally locking onto Jolie. There was a flicker of recognition, of shared history, of a silent plea. Jolie's breath caught in her throat. Her mind, foggy with despair, struggled to place the face. It was familiar, yet out of context, like a word on the tip of her tongue. David Chen leaned in his voice, a low, urgent whisper. "Jolie, who is that?" And then it clicked. The memories came flooding back, not from the polished world of Bel Air galas, but from a different time, a different life. A life before Michael. The worn leather jacket, the anxious eyes. "My God," Jolie whispered, her voice trembling with a dawning incredulous hope. "It's her." Michael had followed everyone's gaze to the door. When he saw the woman, the color drained from his face. His confident, composed mask crumbled, replaced by a raw, primal panic. He shot a desperate look at Rosalind, whose own triumphant expression had frozen into a mask of confusion and alarm. "Your Honor," David Chen said, rising to his feet, his voice suddenly infused with a new, vibrant energy. "My apologies for the interruption, but the defense would like to call one final witness." Judge Thompson's gavel hand hovered in midair. Her face was a thundercloud of impatience. "Mr. Chen, this is highly irregular. The witness list was finalized weeks ago. Who is this person?" A slow smile spread across David's face as he looked from the terrified woman at the door to the suddenly ashen-faced Michael Sterling. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound confidence that made everyone in the courtroom lean forward in their seats. "This is Dr. Eris Thorne, and she was Michael Sterling's first wife." The name hung in the air, thick and heavy with unspoken history. Dr. Eris Thorne. It meant nothing to the society reporters in the gallery, nothing to the high-powered lawyers on Michael's payroll. But to the key players in this drama, it was a ghost resurrected, a skeleton tumbling violently out of a meticulously locked closet. Rosalind Rossi's perfectly manicured hand, which had been resting so possessively on Michael's arm, recoiled as if she had touched a live wire. Her head whipped around to stare at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning fury. "First wife. What the hell is he talking about, Michael? You told me you'd never been married before." Michael couldn't answer. He was staring at the woman in the doorway, Eris, with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. It was as if he was seeing a phantom, a specter from a past he had gone to extraordinary lengths to bury. He looked not just guilty, but terrified. Judge Thompson slammed her gavel down, the sharp crack echoing the splintering of Michael Sterling's carefully constructed facade. "Order! I will have order in my courtroom. Ms. Rossi, control yourself." "Mr. Sterling, who is this woman?" Eris Thorne took a hesitant step into the courtroom, the bailiff halting in his tracks as the drama escalated. She was trembling, her knuckles white where she gripped the strap of her tote bag. She was not a woman who commanded attention. She was the kind of person who tried to blend into the background to go unnoticed. And yet at that moment, every eye was fixed on her. Jolie felt a surge of adrenaline, a dizzying mix of shock and a strange vindictive clarity. She remembered Eris now not vividly but in fragmented images from over a decade ago. They had been undergraduates together at Stanford. Eris had been a brilliant, intense pre-med student, always with her nose in a textbook, her hair perpetually in a messy bun, her clothes more functional than fashionable. She and Michael had been an unlikely pair. He the handsome, charismatic business heir, and she the quiet, studious nobody. Their campus romance had been a whirlwind, intense and all-consuming. They had eloped in their final semester, a hasty ceremony at a Reno courthouse that was whispered about in their social circle as a moment of youthful rebellion for the golden boy Michael Sterling. Jolie had lost touch with them after graduation, hearing only through the grapevine that they had moved to a remote part of Oregon where Eris was doing her residency. And then nothing. The story, as far as anyone knew, had simply ended. When Michael had re-emerged in the Los Angeles social scene a few years later, he was single, charming, and never ever spoke of a previous marriage. It was as if Eris Thorne had ceased to exist. "Your Honor," David Chen pressed, seizing the moment of chaos. "Dr. Eris Thorne has traveled here from Bend, Oregon at great personal risk. She has information that is directly relevant to the character of Mr. Michael Sterling, and his suitability as a parental figure. Information that this court has a right to hear before making a final determination on the welfare of a child. Michael's lead attorney, a slick, silver-haired man named Marcus Thorne, no relation to Eris, a cruel irony not lost on Jolie, leaped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is an outrageous ambush. The defense is attempting to create a circus to distract from the facts of the case with irrelevant ancient history. Whatever relationship my client may or may not have had with this woman over a decade ago has no bearing on his fitness as a father to Leo today." "On the contrary, Your Honor," David countered smoothly. "It has every bearing. It speaks to a pattern of deceit, manipulation, and a profound disregard for the sanctity of family, a pattern that is repeating itself right here in this courtroom." He gestured towards Jolie. "With his current pregnant wife." Judge Thompson looked from the panicked face of Michael Sterling to the determined face of David Chen, and then to the terrified woman at the door. Her judicial curiosity, it seemed, had overridden her procedural annoyance. She leaned forward, her expression grim. "Very well, Mr. Chen, I will allow it. But this had better be relevant. Bailiff, please escort the witness to the stand." As Eris walked the long aisle to the witness stand, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear the soft scuff of her boots on the polished floor. She avoided looking at Michael, her eyes fixed on the wooden railing of the witness box, as if it were a life raft in a stormy sea. When she was sworn in, her voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the confident, articulate tones of Rosalind Rossi. David approached her gently. "Please state your full name for the record." "Dr. Eris Elena Thorne." "And what is your profession, Dr. Thorne?" "I'm a family physician. I run a small rural clinic in Central Oregon." "Thank you for being here, doctor. I know this is difficult for you. Could you please tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Michael Sterling?" Eris took a deep, shuddering breath. Her eyes flickered towards Michael, then quickly away. "Michael and we were married." A collective gasp went through the gallery. Even though David had already announced it, hearing it from her own lips, stated as a simple, undeniable fact, sent a shockwave through the room. "We met in college," Eris continued, her voice gaining a little more strength. "We got married in our last year just before graduation. It was impulsive. We were very young." "And after you were married, where did you live?" David asked. "We moved to a small town outside of Portland, Oregon. I was starting my medical residency. It was a demanding program, long hours. Michael, he had his trust fund. He didn't need to work. He said he was going to support me to be a house husband while I established my career." "And did he?" Eris let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "For a while. He played the part. He'd cook dinner, tell me he was proud of me. But he grew restless. The town was too small for him, my hours too long. He started to complain about being bored, about how my career was taking over our lives. He said I was neglecting him." Jolie felt a chill run down her spine. The words were eerily familiar. They were the same accusations Michael had started leveling at her when her art consultancy began to take off, before she had agreed to scale it back to focus more on their home life. "What happened to your marriage, Dr. Thorne?" David's voice was soft, compassionate. Eris's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "He left. One day I came home from a 36-hour shift at the hospital and the house was empty. Half the furniture was gone. His car was gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter." "What did the note say?" "It said that he couldn't live like this anymore, that he wasn't cut out for this kind of life, that he had met someone else, someone who understood him, who could give him the life he deserved, and that he had already filed for divorce." The parallels were sickeningly clear. A demanding career, an accusation of neglect, another woman waiting in the wings. It was Michael's playbook. "And did he file for divorce, Dr. Thorne?" This was the question that seemed to steal the air from Eris's lungs. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. "That's what I thought. That's what the note said. He said his lawyers would be in touch, that they would handle everything. He said it would be an uncontested dissolution of marriage, and that all I had to do was sign the papers when they arrived. And did they arrive? Eris shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. No, they never came. Objection! Marcus Thorne shouted, jumping up again. Relevance, Your Honor. This is a decade-old marital squabble. Overruled. Judge Thompson snapped, her eyes now glued to Eris. Sit down, Mr. Thorne. I want to hear this. Please continue, Dr. Thorne. You never received any divorce papers. No, Eris whispered. I was devastated and humiliated. I was working 80 hours a week, buried in debt from medical school. I didn't have the money or the energy to hire a lawyer and track him down. He had just vanished. I tried calling his parents, the family I had married into, but their numbers were disconnected. I was alone. I assumed he had filed that it was all legal and he had just moved on. So I did the same. I tried to rebuild my life. David Chen walked back to the defense table and picked up a file. Dr. Thorne, in the weeks leading up to this hearing, my office did some research. We ran a search of public records in every county in California and Nevada, the two states where Mr. Sterling was most likely to have filed for divorce in the years following your separation. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the anticipation build. We found no record of a divorce filing, not a single one. He then turned to face the judge, his voice booming with righteous indignation. Your Honor, what this means is that when Michael Sterling met Jolie Jensen, he gestured to his client and wooed her and proposed to her. He was still legally married to Dr. Eris Thorne. The courtroom erupted. The reporters were scribbling furiously. Rosalind was on her feet, her face contorted in a mask of rage. You lying bastard! She shrieked at Michael, her voice raw with fury. You told me she was just some college fling, a mistake! Michael, for the first time, looked utterly defeated. He slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, as the edifice of his life crumbled around him in a spectacular explosion of his own making. But it gets worse, Your Honor, David Chen said, his voice dropping ominously. Judge Thompson held up a hand, silencing the chaos. Her face was grim, her eyes cold as ice as she stared down at Michael. Mr. Chen, please proceed. David turned back to the witness stand. Dr. Thorne, you said that in his note Michael mentioned he had met someone else. Did you ever find out who that person was? Eris nodded, her body language radiating a deep soul-crushing weariness. Yes. A few months after he left, I started getting collection calls. For credit cards I didn't even know we had. Maxed out. Thousands of dollars in charges from high-end boutiques, luxury hotels. All in Los Angeles. And then I got a bill from a fertility clinic. A very expensive, very exclusive clinic in Beverly Hills. Jolie's blood ran cold. She felt the baby kick inside her, a small, innocent life caught in this web of deceit. The bill was for a cycle of in vitro fertilization. Eris said, her voice cracking with the memory of the betrayal. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Michael Sterling. But I wasn't the Mrs. Sterling who had undergone the procedure. The patient's name on the detailed invoice was listed as Rosalind Rossi. The revelation landed like a bomb in the already incinerated landscape of the courtroom. IVF. Rosalind Rossi. Mr. and Mrs. Michael Sterling. The pieces clicked together with a sickening finality, exposing not just a simple lie, but a breathtakingly audacious, long-conceived fraud. Rosalind Rossi stood frozen, her face a canvas of shock and dawning comprehension. The furious, betrayed woman of a moment ago was replaced by someone who looked like she'd been sucker-punched. The fertility clinic. The name Mrs. Michael Sterling. It all pointed to a deception far more profound than she had imagined. She had been a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Objection, hearsay, speculation. Marcus Thorne was on his feet again, his voice strained, desperate to plug the geyser of damning testimony that was erupting from the witness stand. Your Honor, this is a baseless accusation based on a decade-old piece of mail. Is it, Mr. Thorne? Judge Thompson's voice was dangerously quiet. She turned her steely gaze back to Eris. Dr. Thorne, you said you received an invoice. Do you still have this document? For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear crossed Eris's face. It was a quiet, sorrowful resolve. She reached down into the oversized tote bag she had been clutching like a lifeline. Her trembling hands fumbled with the zipper before pulling out a thick, worn manila folder. I kept everything, she said, her voice heavy with the weight of the years she had carried this secret. The collection notices, the credit card statements, and this. She slid a creased multi-page document out of the folder and handed it to the bailiff, who then passed it up to the judge. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Thompson put on her reading glasses and examined the papers. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. The letterhead was clearly visible even from a distance. Beverly Hills Center for Reproductive Medicine. The date on this invoice, Judge Thompson said, her voice flat and cold, is from almost 6 years ago. It details the costs for one full cycle of in vitro fertilization, including genetic screening and embryo transfer. The listed patients are Michael Sterling and Eris Sterling. However, the patient undergoing the procedure is listed as Rosalind Rossi, using Eris Sterling's insurance information and date of birth. She looked up from the paper, her eyes boring first into Michael, who seemed to shrink in his chair, and then into Rosalind, whose face had gone from shocked to ashen. Ms. Rossi, the judge said, her tone laced with ice. Were you aware that you were receiving medical treatment under a false name, that you were impersonating this man's legal wife in order to conceive a child with him? Rosalind opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Michael, her eyes pleading for an explanation, for a denial, for anything that would make this nightmare make sense. But Michael just sat there, his face buried in his hands, a broken statue of a man. He told me it was a legal loophole, Rosalind finally stammered, her voice a pathetic whisper. He said his family trust had stipulations, that he had to be married to access the funds needed for the treatment. He said it was just paperwork, a formality to get the insurance to cover it. He told me the divorce from his college girlfriend was messy and he didn't want to wait. He promised he would marry me as soon as it was finalized. The entire sordid tapestry was now laid bare. It wasn't a crime of passion or a simple infidelity. It was a meticulously planned, cold-blooded scheme. Michael, unwilling to wait for a legitimate divorce and wanting to maintain the facade of a single man for his re-entry into the LA social scene, had used his still legal wife Eris as a ghost. He used her name, her identity, and her credit to fund the creation of his new family with Rosalind. He had built his new life on the ashes of his old one, never bothering to sweep them up. Jolie felt a wave of nausea so profound she thought she might be sick right there at the defendant's table. This man, this stranger sitting across from her, was the father of the child kicking beneath her heart. He hadn't just cheated on her, he had built their entire 7-year marriage on a foundation of quicksand. Their wedding vows, their shared home, their life together, it was all a sham. A lie wrapped in a lie. Her marriage wasn't just ending, it had never legally existed. She was not Mrs. Michael Sterling, she had never been. So, to be clear, Mr. Sterling. Judge Thompson continued, her voice dripping with contempt as she addressed the back of Michael's head. You left your wife, Dr. Thorne, while she was working 80-hour weeks as a medical resident to support you. You then used her identity and credit to defraud a medical facility and an insurance company to conceive a child with your mistress. You allowed Dr. Thorne to be pursued by collection agencies for debts you incurred. You then abandoned your mistress and your newborn son to reinvent yourself yet again, meet and marry another woman, Jolie, all while still being legally married to your first wife. And now you stand before this court demanding sole custody of that child with the very woman you conspired with, claiming that you're pregnant and, as it turns out, not actually wife, is emotionally unstable. Have I summarized the facts correctly? Michael finally looked up. His face was a wreck of sweat and despair. Your Honor, it was complicated. Complicated! the judge repeated, her voice rising in volume. "Mr. Sterling, what you have done is not complicated. It is monstrous. It is a level of sociopathic deception that this court has rarely witnessed." She turned her furious gaze to Marcus Thorne. "And you, Mr. Thorne, did you have any knowledge of this? Did you conduct even the most basic due diligence on your client's marital history before filing a suit based on his impeccable character?" Marcus Thorne looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Your Honor, I can assure you I was acting on the information provided by my client. I had no knowledge of any of this." He shot a look of pure venom at Michael. His reputation was being immolated right alongside his client's. The case was no longer about custody. It had morphed into a public trial of Michael Sterling's entire life. The reporters in the gallery were in a feeding frenzy, the tapping of their fingers on their phones a frantic drumbeat of career-making scandal. Tech CEO Michael Sterling, a bigamist and fraudster. The headlines wrote themselves. David Chen, seeing his opening, approached the bench. "Your Honor, in light of this testimony, which reveals a pattern of criminal fraud, identity theft, and bigamy on the part of Mr. Sterling and willing conspiracy on the part of Ms. Rossi, we believe the entire premise of their petition is null and void. They have demonstrated a profound and pathological inability to act in the best interest of any child, let alone Leo." He then turned to Jolie, his voice softening. "My client Jolie Sterling, or rather Jolie Jensen as is her legal name, has been the victim of an elaborate multi-year fraud. She entered into a marriage in good faith, built a home, and is carrying Mr. Sterling's child under the assumption that they had a legitimate legal partnership. She is the only innocent adult in this entire tragic affair." The judge stared at Jolie, and for the first time the hardness in her eyes was replaced by something approaching sympathy. She saw not the polished Bel Air socialite, but a woman whose world had been systematically dismantled by the man she loved. A woman who was 8 months pregnant and had just discovered her entire life was a lie. "Furthermore, Your Honor," David continued, turning back to the witness stand, "Dr. Thorne has more to tell the court. This isn't just about financial fraud. There is a reason she has stayed silent for all these years. A reason she was too afraid to come forward until she was contacted by my office." He walked back to Aries, who was now weeping silently, her face a mask of old deep-seated pain. "Dr. Thorne," David said gently, "can you please tell the court why you never pursued legal action against Mr. Sterling? Why you let him disappear?" Aries took a ragged breath, trying to compose herself. She looked at Michael, and for the first time there was no fear in her eyes, only a profound, bottomless sadness. "Because I was afraid of him," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "When he was bored and restless in Oregon, he wasn't just complaining. He was controlling. He would check the mileage on my car. He would go through my phone. He would get angry if I wanted to have dinner with my colleagues after a long shift. He accused me of cheating on him." She paused, swallowing hard. "The night before he left, we had a fight, a bad one. He had been drinking. I told him I couldn't live with his jealousy anymore. He got so angry. He backed me into a corner in the kitchen. He raised his hand to me. He didn't hit me, but he came close. He told me that if I ever tried to leave him or tell anyone what he was really like, he would ruin me. He said he had the money and the power to destroy my career before it even started, to make sure I would never practice medicine again, and I believed him." She looked directly at the judge, her eyes pleading for understanding. "So when he left, yes, I was heartbroken. But I was also relieved. I was free. And I was terrified that if I made any noise, if I tried to find him or sue him, he would make good on his threat. So I let him go. I buried it. I just wanted to be left alone." A heavy, sickening silence descended on the courtroom. The story of Michael Sterling was now complete. He was not just a cheat and a fraud. He was a manipulative, abusive bully. "And why did you decide to come forward now, Dr. Thorne?" David asked, his voice full of compassion. Eris turned her gaze to Jolie. Their eyes met across the courtroom, a silent communication of shared experience of being victimized by the same man. I saw an article online, Eris said, about this custody hearing. It mentioned his pregnant wife, Jolie Sterling. And I saw his picture, and hers. And I realized he was doing it again. He was creating another life, another family built on another mountain of lies. And this time, there were children involved. 2 children. One who was already here, and one who was on the way. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent and let him destroy another woman's life, and potentially the lives of those children. She had not come for revenge. She had come to stop him. Judge Thompson slowly removed her glasses. She looked at Michael Sterling with a look of such pure, unadulterated disgust that it made him physically flinch. She picked up the petition filed by Rosalind Rossi, the one that had been on the verge of being granted. She held it up for the court to see, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she tore it in half. The sound of tearing paper was a thunderclap in the funereal silence of the courtroom. It was more than just the destruction of a legal document. It was the sound of a verdict rendered of a universe of lies being ripped apart at its very seams. The 2 halves of Rosalind Rossi's meticulously crafted petition fluttered down onto the judge's bench like the severed wings of a fallen angel. The grand design was in ruins. This hearing is concluded, Judge Thompson announced, her voice resonating with a cold final fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. The petition by Ms. Rossi is dismissed with extreme prejudice. Mr. Sterling, Ms. Rossi. She locked her eyes on each of them in turn, her gaze a physical force. I would strongly advise you both to retain criminal counsel. I am referring this entire matter, the bigamy, the conspiracy to commit fraud, the identity theft, to the district attorney's office. I expect indictments to be forthcoming. She then pivoted her formidable attention to Michael's lawyer, the once slick, now sweating Marcus Thorne. Mr. Thorne, given the egregious nature of these revelations and the resources at your client's disposal, this court deems him a significant flight risk. I am remanding him into custody immediately without bail pending the DA's investigation. The words hung in the air, absolute and irrevocable. 2 burly bailiffs who had been standing by with an air of bored professionalism now moved with a new, grim purpose. They converged on Michael, who sat slumped in his chair, a man hollowed out from the inside. He seemed to have aged a decade in the last hour. The charismatic mask melted away to reveal the weak, terrified man beneath. He didn't resist as they hauled him to his feet with practiced efficiency, his expensive suit rumpling in their grip. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed through the cavernous room. It was the sound of a final unceremonious closing of a chapter, the slamming of a prison door on a life of privilege and deceit. As the bailiffs led him away, he turned his head, swiveling on his neck as if by a great effort. He looked once at Jolie, his eyes a black hole of desperation, regret, and a pathetic plea for an understanding he had not earned. Jolie met his gaze, and the most terrifying thing was what she felt. Nothing. Not the searing rage of betrayal, not the deep sorrow of a love lost, not even the cold satisfaction of justice. Just a vast, hollow emptiness. A void where 7 years of her life used to be. The man being led away was a stranger. The man she thought she had loved, the man whose child she carried, had been a phantom, a carefully constructed character in a play of his own devising. She was a ghost, mourning a ghost. Rosalind Rossi stood utterly alone, an island in a sea of condemnation. Her high-priced lawyers were already executing a strategic retreat, gathering their alligator skin briefcases with grim, tight faces, their professional detachment a clear signal of abandonment. She was no longer the confident, glamorous mistress poised to claim her prize. She was just a co-conspirator, a woman whose ambition and desperation for a certain kind of life had led her to become a willing participant in a monstrous fraud. The future she had fought so viciously for, a life of wealth and status as the rightful Mrs. Sterling had vanished in a puff of smoke replaced by the terrifying and very real prospect of criminal charges, public disgrace, and financial ruin. She looked at the torn petition on the judge's bench, then at the empty chair where Michael had sat, and a single guttural sob ripped from the depths of her being escaped her lips. It was the sound of a dream dying. Judge Thompson's stern gaze softened as it finally fell upon the two women who remained at the epicenter of the storm. Eris Thorne, who stood hesitantly by the witness stand, and Jolie, who sat shell-shocked at the defendant's table. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice losing its hard, punitive edge and taking on a tone of profound respect. "You have shown incredible courage today. This court and I am certain Ms. Jensen are in your debt. You are excused." Eris gave a shaky, grateful nod, clutching her worn tote bag as if it were a shield. As she stepped down from the witness stand, her journey across the courtroom floor felt like a victory lap, run in slow motion. Her eyes met Jolie's once more, a silent exchange passing between them. There was no triumph in Eris's expression, only a shared profound sorrow, an unspoken acknowledgement of their unique and terrible bond. She gave Jolie a small, almost imperceptible nod of solidarity before turning and walking quickly out of the courtroom, a ghost who had done her haunting and was now retreating back to the quiet, peaceful life she had fought so hard to build. Finally, the judge addressed Jolie directly, her voice now imbued with a surprising gentleness. "Ms. Jensen," she said, using her legal name with a deliberate kindness that was a balm on Jolie's raw nerves. "You have been the victim of a terrible, complex deception. The court's primary concern now above all else is the welfare of the two children caught in the middle of this catastrophe." She paused, removing her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose, the weight of the moment seeming to settle upon her. "Leo is a victim here as well, an innocent. He is currently in the care of a woman who is at this very moment a person of interest in a criminal investigation and is likely to face serious charges. His father is incarcerated indefinitely. The boy will need a stable, safe environment. Immediately." David Chen rose slowly, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Your Honor, my client Ms. Jensen, despite the immense personal trauma she has just endured, is prepared to do what is right for the children. Both of them." Judge Thompson's eyes, sharp and assessing, fixed on Jolie. It was a gaze that seemed to peel back the layers of shock and see right into her soul. "Ms. Jensen, this is an extraordinary, perhaps an unfair amount to ask of you. You are under no obligation whatsoever. But as of this moment, you are the only responsible, stable, and unimpeachable adult figure in these children's lives. Child Protective Services will have to be involved, of course, but a recommendation from this court for temporary placement would carry significant weight. Would you be willing to assume temporary guardianship of Leo pending a more permanent arrangement?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any accusation that had been leveled that day. Take in Leo, the child of her husband's affair, the living, breathing symbol of his ultimate betrayal. The old Jolie. The woman who had walked into the courtroom that morning broken but still believing in the framework of her life would have recoiled in horror. The thought would have been a violation, an impossibility. But she wasn't that person anymore. That person's life had been a fiction, a house of cards built on a swamp. In the crucible of the last hour, she had been stripped of her illusions, of her name, of her past. All that was left was the woman she was, right now a mother on the cusp of bringing a new life into the world, looking at the looming reality of a little boy who was about to lose everything and everyone he had ever known. A boy who was by a quirk of blood and deceit, her baby's half-brother. She looked at David, her anchor in this storm, and he gave her a supportive, empowering nod. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her hand instinctively going to her swollen belly, a protective, primal gesture. The baby kicked gently, a small, reassuring flutter from within, a reminder of the life that was untainted by all of this. A life that deserved a future free of hatred. Could she deny that same peace to his brother? "Yes, Your Honor," Jolie said, her voice clear and steady, a strength she didn't know she possessed rising to the surface. "I will." The weeks that followed were a surreal blur, a chaotic montage of legal proceedings, sympathetic but intrusive social workers, and screaming newspaper headlines that chronicled the sordid details of the Bel Air bigamous scandal with relentless glee. Michael and Rosalind were both indicted on multiple felony counts of fraud, conspiracy, and bigamy. Sterling Innovations' board of directors, in a desperate act of damage control, ousted Michael in a terse, brutal press release, and the company's stock plummeted like a stone. The gilded fortress had not just fallen, it had been razed to the ground and its foundation salted. Jolie, with David Chen's tireless guidance, began the painstaking, heartbreaking process of untangling her life from the wreckage. Her 7-year marriage was legally annulled, declared void from its fraudulent inception. The magnificent Bel Air mansion purchased with funds from the non-existent marriage became a legal battlefield, a carcass for the Sterling family trust, a horde of creditors, and a very interested IRS to fight over. Jolie walked away from all of it without a backward glance. She took only her personal belongings, her dignity, and the contents of the modest bank account she had maintained from her old art consultancy days. She wanted nothing that was touched by the lie. The most challenging, and to her immense surprise, the most healing part of her new life was Leo. He arrived at the small, sunlit 2-bedroom apartment Jolie had rented in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood a world away from the cold grandeur of Bel Air. He was a small, bewildered soul clutching a worn teddy bear with a ferocity that spoke of his terror. His world had been shattered. The woman he knew as Mommy was gone, lost to a confusing world of lawyers and court dates. The man he idolized as Daddy was now just a grainy picture in the newspaper, a sad-looking man in handcuffs. There were difficult days that tested the very limits of Jolie's newfound resolve. There were tantrums born of a confusion and fear too big for his small body to contain. There were nights when he would cry himself to sleep, whispering for a mother who couldn't be there. Jolie, exhausted and emotionally raw herself, would simply sit with him, her presence a quiet, constant promise that he was not alone. She saw in his frightened eyes not the reflection of Michael's betrayal, but an innocent casualty of a war he never chose. She began to build a new routine, a new world for him, brick by brick. She read him Where the Wild Things Are every single night, her voice a soothing balm in the darkness. She took him to the park, pushing him on the swings until he giggled a sound that felt like a miracle. And she answered his heartbreakingly direct questions with a gentle, unwavering honesty that he seemed to crave. She told him that sometimes grown-ups make very big, very sad mistakes, but that none of it, not one single part of it, was his fault. Slowly, tentatively, like a fragile sprout pushing through hard earth, a bond began to form. He started to call her Jolie, his small hand instinctively reaching for hers when they crossed the street. One afternoon, as she sat on the sofa, tired and heavy, he crept over and gently laid his head on her belly. "Hi, baby brother," he whispered to the bump. "I'm Leo. I'm going to show you how to build with Legos." In mothering him, Jolie found a purpose that transcended her own pain. She was not just a victim rebuilding, she was a protector, a creator of a new, smaller but far more authentic life. 3 weeks after that fateful day in court, Jolie went into labor. It was long and arduous, a physical manifestation of the emotional trial she had endured. But as the first light of dawn streamed through the hospital window, she held her son in her arms. He was small and perfect, with a shock of dark hair like Michael's, but with her own determined eyes. She looked at him, this beautiful, innocent new beginning, and knew his name. Ethan. Ethan James Jensen. Not Sterling. He was hers alone. A few days later, as she sat in the sterile quiet of her hospital room, Ethan sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her, there was a soft knock on the door. A nurse entered, her arms full of a large rustic floral arrangement. "This just arrived for you, Ms. Jensen," she said with a warm smile. The arrangement was a simple, breathtakingly beautiful mix of wildflowers, deep blue lupine, fiery Indian paintbrush, and delicate white yarrow. It was a bouquet of the wilderness, not the ostentatious, perfectly manicured roses Michael would have sent. Tucked inside the foliage was a small plain card. With a slightly trembling hand, Jolie opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise, and familiar. Jolie, I read about the birth of your son in an online announcement. Congratulations. And I read through the legal grapevine about what you did for Leo. There are no words to express my admiration. You are a far better woman than I would have been in your shoes. I have taken the liberty of starting a trust fund for both boys. It's not much, but it's a start. Something clean for them. Something that has nothing to do with the sterling name or its tainted money. I hope one day our paths might cross again under much better, much brighter circumstances. Until then, I wish you, Ethan and Leo, a life of peace you all so richly deserve. Yours in solidarity, Eris Thorne. Tears, hot and immediate, welled in Jolie's eyes and spilled down her cheeks as she read the note. They were not the tears of sadness or loss she had grown so accustomed to. They were tears of profound gratitude. In the smoldering ruins of her life, she had found an unexpected, improbable ally, a sister she never knew she had forged in the fires of a shared betrayal. She looked at her son Ethan, sleeping so peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling in the most reassuring rhythm in the world. She thought of Leo, safe with her mother, waiting for them to come home. Her life was not the one she had so carefully planned. It was messy, it was complicated, and it would forever bear the deep, indelible scars of betrayal. But it was real, and for the first time in 7 years, it was completely, unequivocally hers. The gilded cage was gone, its bars melted down. In its place, she was building a small, sometimes chaotic, but fiercely protected home. A home built not on lies, but on the resilient, unbreakable, and truly astonishing strength of a mother's love. She was no longer a Sterling. She was Jolie Jensen, and she was finally truly free. The story of Jolie, Michael, and Eris is a chilling reminder that the most devastating betrayals often come from those we trust the most. It's a testament to the quiet strength it takes to face an unthinkable reality and choose to build something new from the rubble. If this story of resilience, deception, and the surprising bonds forged in crisis resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story where truth, however painful, ultimately prevails. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life dramas that explore the complexities of human relationships and the incredible power of the human spirit to overcome adversity. What did you find most shocking about Michael's deception? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for listening.